good afternoon, everybody. So glad you could join us here today. My name is Roger Berry. I'm the administrator of the Nebraska Ethanol Board. And I want to just take this opportunity to thank you once again for attending and to welcome you to the 2020 Nebraska Ethanol Board Environment, Health, and Safety Summit. You know, this is not the way that we had envisioned to meet this year. When we were planning this, we were planning on meeting in Kearney, just like we've done for the past 16 years, 15 years, I guess, since this is the 16th one. And, you know, sometimes things don't always go the way that we plan. So I'm just very glad that we have the technology available, that we can get together in this fashion and still learn from each other and continue to move the ethanol industry forward here in the state of Nebraska. We've got a great lineup of speakers today. And speaking of a great lineup of speakers, I want to take the opportunity right now to publicly thank Joe Oswald. Joe has been extremely big help on helping to get this organized, and you know, his steadfast support and help with this, the organization of this meeting this year, just simply could not have done it without Joe. So Joe, I just want to publicly thank you before we even get started here so that your peers know what a big part you played in this. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here getting going, and but I do want to do just some real quick housekeeping, and as soon as I do that, we're going to jump right into this. So what I want you all to know is that as the speakers are going along, we're not going to do any questions while they're speaking. But we are going to allow time at the end of each of their speaking times in order to answer those questions. So during the presentation, you are more than welcome, if you think of a question, you're more than welcome to go ahead and type that into the chat box. For those of you who don't know where the chat box is, if you take your mouse down towards the bottom of your screen for the Zoom, you'll find the chat box down there and you can enter it in there. And we are going to ask that as you submit your questions, that you direct those questions to me. You'll have choices on who you can submit those questions to. It will be to, you can either select everyone or you can pick out individual names. For these first for the first three speakers, I would like to direct the questions just to me, and there's a reason why we want to do that. We want to keep our questions today basically anonymous. In the spirit of having good discussions today, I just want to make sure that we're not identifying anybody with questions that may be there. So we just ask that you submit those questions to me. That way nobody else will see them. And after the speaker is finished, I will go through those questions and we'll get to as many of them as we can. I know we're probably going to have more questions than we're going to have time to do, but we will answer as many questions as we can, and I will read those questions to the speaker and have them answer at that time. So once again, as you submit your questions, submit those under my name, Roger Berry. So with that, let's go ahead and get started for the day. We'll just kick this thing right off, and so that way we can stay as close to on schedule as possible. Our first speaker today is Doug Fletcher. Doug has worked as safety and health professional for over 23 years, and he is a certified safety professional and a certified industrial hygienist. Prior to starting Fletcher Safety Consulting Incorporated, Doug worked for Federal OSHA's Omaha area office for 17 years. So Doug, it looks like you've got a little bit of experience behind your belt here, and we're just really happy to have you today. And Doug is going to be presenting on OSHA hot topics today. So Doug, with that, take it away.
Thank you, Roger. When you say it looks like I have a lot of experience, is that a reflection of the wear on my face? Is that some kind of, yeah, I do want to thank, it's a pleasure to be with you all, and Roger and Jessica in particular, thank you. I'm coming to you in no small part because Jessica was able to help me figure this out, so I appreciate her help. And I'm not quite sure if I'm going to thank Joe or not. We'll leave that to decide later. As is oftentimes the case, I was asked to give an update on OSHA, what the agency is up to, and so I've had an opportunity to speak with some of the guys and try to get some feedback from them on what we can look forward to in fiscal year 21. So I have a little bit of a presentation I put together. I'm going to try to bring that up right now if possible, and then we'll go from there. So looks like this might be it if I can, let's see. There we go. Are we good there? Roger, that looks good.
Yep, Doug, you're coming through great.
Okay. Just to start this, most of you have my contact information, and you are always welcome to reach out if you have questions, or if you don't happen to get a question answered today that you would like to pursue, feel free to contact me at my email address. I've kind of entitled the program OSHA 2020 Business as Usual, not quite yet. That's the feedback that I've gotten from the guys in the office, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about that and what we can expect over the coming year. But let's go forward. In the spirit of shameless self-promotion, I do want to mention that we have been doing a safety and health podcast for about the last year. It's called What's the Hazard? It's available on a number of different podcast platforms. We talk about safety and industrial hygiene topics. Joe has actually joined me on the podcast for an episode. And if you are looking for a way to spend a stimulating hour or more, feel free to seek out What's the Hazard and give it a listen. And if you would like to participate, if you'd like to be on the program or whatever, just let me know. We'd appreciate it. I left the office at the end of 2013. Actually, it's been almost 7 years now since I left the Omaha area office. And for those of you who have not had any contact with the office recently, there has been a lot of change in the office. I've just put together just a little bit of a kind of an organizational chart for you. Matt Thurlby, many of you probably know Matt. Matt Thurlby is the area director for Nebraska at this time. He was recently selected for that position, probably within the last 3 or 4 months. And so, yeah, Matt is the area director. And then in this, I've indicated Scott Jacobson. He was a compliance officer for a number of years, and Scott is currently, we would call him the enforcement programs liaison. He is basically a regional office representative in the office who is responsible for higher level reviews, for technical support. He would be involved in fatality investigations, significant cases, things of that nature. And then Dan Dwyer, who has actually only been in the office for a few years, was recently selected for the compliance assistance position, which is the position that I held for about 10 years in the office. This is the outreach position. Unfortunately, they're not being permitted to do a lot of outreach, but at some point, if and when they're allowed to do that again, Dan Dwyer will certainly be a person that you will have interaction with. And if you do have a need to contact the area office for some reason and prefer to go through Dan, he's the non-enforcement person in the office at this point, more of the voluntary compliance issues. So you could certainly contact Dan in that case. Darwin Craig is one of the assistant area directors. He has been so for 20 years. And he is the one mainstay in the office. Probably he's been there for 30 years, and most of you probably know Darwin. And then Nick Senior is the assistant area director for the industrial hygiene side of the office. And then just a few familiar names, Brian Elmore, Phil Pasali are still compliance officers. They're actually probably individuals that you may know. They're both PSM inspectors, so they both do process safety management. And there is a possibility that in the ethanol world, you could have some interaction with Brian or Phil. And then Matt Lombardi is a compliance officer. Tori, I don't even know his last name. He's so new. He's one of the compliance officers. And that's all I know at this point. I know they've had a number of compliance officers recently leave the office. A full complement of inspectors would normally be 10 for the state of Nebraska. And to my knowledge, they have 4 at this time, and one of those individuals would be fulfilling the duty officer job as well. So they are tremendously understaffed at this time. I know they're trying to fill some of those positions, and hopefully they'll be able to do that. I know how difficult it is for the office to function when they're understaffed like this, but this is kind of the Omaha area office in a nutshell. From an enforcement standpoint, I had an opportunity to speak with Matt and Nick Senior and Phil Pasali, and they are not quite back to business as usual. As Matt described it, the Omaha area office is still very COVID driven. So most of their enforcement decision making is being still dictated by their COVID enforcement protocols. They are still reactive rather than proactive, which means they are not conducting programmed inspections. Okay, they are still doing unprogrammed work, which would consist of primarily COVID-related issues, COVID-related fatalities, COVID-related complaints, COVID-related outbreaks in certain areas or in certain facilities, perhaps. They would be, of course, investigating non-COVID-related fatalities, amputations, inpatient hospitalizations, and perhaps even, the loss of eye situations under the Rapid Response Investigation Program, the program where we are required to contact the office. But other than that, they are not really back to business as usual, unfortunately. There is still a duty. They are actually all still teleworking. No one is working in the area office facility. And so if you do contact the area office to speak with a duty officer or to make some other contact, you are probably going to be instructed to leave a message and then have to wait until someone responds to your contact. The agency has published a number of documents during the pandemic that have given direction on how we are supposed to be conducting our business and as well as internal business. There is a memorandum dated May 19th of 2020 that talks about interim enforcement guidelines for the current enforcement climate, and it breaks enforcement down into two categories, basically. Some of you may have even seen this document. All of this stuff is available on the website, the OSHA.gov website, if you are interested in reading further. But they've basically broken all jurisdictions down into those that are significantly decreasing in numbers of COVID cases, and those that are either have a sustained or even a resurgence in COVID cases. And unfortunately, Nebraska has been designated one of those sustained or resurging. Our numbers, at least in the counties in eastern Nebraska, have not come down significantly. And so as of today, the area office is following the guidance from the national office as it pertains to communities where there is sustained COVID activity. And so what that basically has done is eliminated some of the programmed work activities and focused most of the attention, unfortunately, on COVID-related issues. As I mentioned, they're still doing non-programmed work, unprogrammed work, fatality and accident investigations, but even those aren't being conducted in the same fashion that they used to be. They are probably being done virtually rather than on site in many cases, which is incredibly difficult, but that's unfortunately the case. They are focusing on high and very high risk workplaces primarily. If you have read that OSHA guidance, you will know that they've categorized workplaces into 4 basic categories. Very high risk, which would be probably healthcare facilities where they're working with COVID patients and performing, activities that might generate aerosols or something. They might be intubating, they might be doing other pulmonary types of treatments. And in those very high risk categories, OSHA has focused a lot of attention. The high risk categories might be other healthcare facilities where they're treating COVID patients. They also get a lot of attention. That could be healthcare facilities like hospitals. That could be long-term care facilities. It could be post-mortem. It could even be laboratories where they're handling that type of patient or material. Medium risk facilities would basically be facilities where there's a lot of close quarters. Employees are forced to work in close quarters. They might have a great deal of interaction with the public, or they might be traveling significantly. And those in Nebraska are primarily the food processing facilities, meat packing plants, things like that. And then the low risk facilities would be much like ethanol facilities, probably, where there's much less likelihood of transmission less interaction with the public, etc. So, I guess the good news is that ethanol is probably considered a low risk type of workplace, and therefore OSHA isn't focusing terribly heavily on our workplaces right now. I have had a few of my clients in the food processing world have interaction with OSHA, and actually some on-site activities. In fact, one of the things OSHA did fairly early was to ensure that through virtual activity, through phone and fax type activity or email activity, they wanted to ensure that the food processing facilities were following CDC guidelines as far as face coverings and social distancing and implementation of barriers and other cleaning, housekeeping practices, things like that. And so a number of my clients were contacted by OSHA early on, probably late spring and early summer, just to verify that they were in fact doing those things, or to what extent they were doing those things. And then there were a few instances where an OSHA compliance officer would come on site to verify those things. I have to be honest, two of my facilities were visited by OSHA, and the OSHA compliance officers were not on site very long. They were there only to verify that the steps being taken, at least as reported by the facilities, were in fact true. They were following the guidelines to the best of their ability. And once that was verified, the compliance officers were very hastily exiting the facilities. And so I know that they are, as I mentioned, I spoke with some of the guys, and they are doing other investigations, but whether or not these will be on site is at the area director's discretion oftentimes, and they're not always doing on-site investigations now in situations that they probably would have previously. So that is interesting. There is a document that is also on the OSHA website, osha.gov, that talks about discretion and enforcement when considering an employer's good faith efforts during the pandemic. And so this is really referring to things like annual training. If we're not really supposed to be congregating large groups, or can I do annual training or inspections if I have to bring someone in from the outside to do fit testing or to do spirometry or to do audiometry or things like that, or even crane inspections perhaps. If I have to bring a third party in and I'm unable to do those things because of these constraints, what do I do? And so OSHA published this document in an effort to try to explain their position on this, acknowledging that it may not be possible to do things as we have done previously, where that pertains to inspections and training. But they do go on to say certainly that there must be some steps taken in the alternative, and that's usually the case as far as OSHA is concerned. If you are unable to comply with the normal expectations, specifically due to COVID-19 issues, what are you doing in the alternative? Be sure that you can demonstrate why you haven't done your annual training on time, or perhaps why you haven't done your fit testing on time or as normally scheduled. What are you doing in the alternative? Are we doing heightened training? Are we comfortable that these employees are still able to wear the respirators they were fit tested for last year? Because there have been no physical changes, no medical changes, things like that. And we need to be able to demonstrate a plan for completion, which, maybe we've already done that. Maybe we've already been able to resume those things that have been on hold for a while. But the point of the document being that there is an understanding that there may be some disruption to these activities, but we can't simply just say, well, we weren't able to do it. We need to have some type of consideration and documentation to demonstrate that, alternative protections that we've taken, and certainly a plan for completion of those things if we have not yet done so. We still have a duty to implement an effective safety and health program. The fact that we've had these interruptions, these disruptions, doesn't excuse us from what we are normally required to do. And I know in the ethanol world that interruption probably didn't take place. It was probably more in some of the higher risk facilities, frankly, but we are still required to do training, inspections, record keeping, reporting, all of those things as we normally would. They may have been modified somewhat, but those are still the expectations, and so we still have a duty to accomplish those things. I have an anonymous source or two in the office, and I'm told that there has been some suggestion that Nebraska specifically will resume normal operations in fiscal year 21, which is October 1st. So day after tomorrow would be the start of fiscal year 21. And again, they believe, at least the individuals that I spoke with believe that there will be a return to programmed inspection activity, and a bit of a decline of that emphasis on COVID specifically. Hopefully a return to business as usual to some degree, but I guess that we will have to see whether that's the case or not. Joe asked me to talk a little bit about things that OSHA focuses on and things that OSHA is interested in, more so than just some of this more programmatic stuff. And so I think there's always a benefit in knowing what is most frequently cited. These are Nebraska's most frequently cited from fiscal year 2019, so it does not include this most recent year, but the highlighted areas are general industry regulations that are continually cited, and hazard communication, of course, is always there. Lockout, tagout is always there. Respiratory protection is frequently there. Powered industrial trucks has become more and more prevalent. Machine guarding, and then PPE, eye and face protection in this instance. And one of the reasons for that, I think it's important to realize that one of the reasons that hazard communication, lockout, tagout, and powered industrial trucks are always on the top of the list, most frequently cited, is that in Nebraska, at least, every general industry inspection, the basic protocol includes an evaluation of those three programs. So anytime they come onto a facility, whether it be a comprehensive programmed inspection or a fatality investigation, an accident, a complaint, whatever triggers that inspection activity, hazard communication is going to be evaluated, lockout, tagout is going to be evaluated, and powered industrial trucks recently has been added to that list. And so those things, they get a lot of attention, obviously. If you are doing nothing else in your safety program, which I know is not the case, but if you are looking for things to focus on or perhaps even revisit, those three would certainly be important. And then the machine guarding in general industry settings is obviously something that gets a lot of attention, kind of goes hand in hand with lockout, tagout, and PPE. Those are always the big ones. And so I don't think that's any surprise, but there is a reason why those things are always in the top 10, in addition to the fact that they find things there, but they are looking for things in those areas. And so I think it's important that we pay attention to those things. I pulled this information off the website. I was just doing a little bit of research on, general duty citations, 5A1s. I wanted to see whether or not OSHA here in Nebraska had issued any citations for COVID-related issues, and that would typically be a 5A1 citation. What I found when I looked at the information, there were the three cases that I have listed at the top here: the Dollar Tree in La Vista, Frontier Co-op in Burr, and Interstate Commodities in Fremont. These three cases were all issued, significant cases above $40,000, issued, fairly recently. These were most recent significant cases. They were interesting. The Dollar Tree was actually a series of willful and repeat violations based on inspections made at Dollar Tree as a corporation previously, to the tune of $539,000. I thought that was remarkable. The Frontier Co-op, as we know, was a fatality investigation at one of the co-op service stations related to a tire changing accident and unfortunate fatality. Then the Interstate Commodities was also a fatality, an engulfment fatality in Fremont, and all three resulted in what OSHA refers to as a significant case, meaning a dollar amount above $40,000. I just found that interesting. And then I went on, and these are, the next list are the 5A1s in fiscal year 2020. And there is a bit of a I guess some commonality between these. The Butte implement, there was an employee crushed while doing maintenance on a skid steer. Apparently he had the bucket elevated and was crushed between the chassis of the skid steer and the arm when they apparently dropped and crushed the individual. Summit Calf Ranch, an employee fell from a calf trailer and struck his head and died, unfortunately. Highland Dairy, no seatbelt on forklift. Airlight Plastics, no seatbelt on forklift. And then the fifth one, the Interstate Commodities issue, they were elevating employees on a pallet on a JLG with no fall protection. So many of these focus on certainly forklifts specifically, but material handling in general, material handling equipment. And I think that's interesting. Those are 581 citations, and it is something that we should probably be aware of. And maybe we all just need to go back and review our forklift programs and make sure that those are in order, because it appears that OSHA focuses heavily on those. In the event that they do resume normal programmed work activities, the national emphasis programs are listed on the OSHA website, or you can Google OSHA NEPs and you can find everything that they're focusing on. As you look through this list, crystalline silica, trenching and excavations, combustible dust. PSM covered chemical facilities is still on the list. This program has been around since probably in some iteration since 2017 probably. And so this would be one way they could get into an ethanol plant, certainly in a programmed fashion. Hazardous machinery, hexavalent chromium lead. So the national emphasis programs, to my knowledge, have not changed, and I doubt they've done much with them over the last 6 months. Local emphasis programs here in Nebraska, also available on the Google. Grain handling facilities, construction following a storm, meat processing facilities, powered industrial trucks. Again, they focus heavily on powered industrial trucks, noise and respirator hazards, agricultural and hydrous ammonia, and then their construction program, which is falls, scaffolds, and overhead power line hazards. I just found out today that OSHA has published the employer injury and illness data that they collected under the e-reporting rules. So, so for the last few years, we have been required to submit electronically our OSHA 300A information. If you have a facility with basically 20 or more employees, you're required to submit this information through the injury tracking application on OSHA's website. So this information is now published. Interestingly, this is thousands and thousands of facilities that submit this information. I went onto the OSHA website, osha.gov, this morning. I clicked on the tab for help and resources. At the top of the home page, I went into the data page, and then I went to the injury tracking application, clicked on that, and I was able to pull up the spreadsheets for calendar years 16, 17, and 18 of all of the companies who reported information electronically. That is out there. It's available to the public. I think it is, it's obviously being used for targeting internally. OSHA uses this information to identify facilities for inspection under their site-specific targeting program. It'll also be interested to see what other people use for it. Being kind of a conspiracy theorist, I put some, I don't know if insurance companies, if plaintiffs' attorneys, if competitors, if the pre-qualification companies, I don't know who will be using this information, but it's out there and it's available, and it was easy to find, and it was certainly easy for me to search. And so, and frankly, I searched under ethanol plants in Nebraska, and I saw a number of your facilities listed there. So that's interesting. I think it might be worth checking out. I'm running out of time here. I have a little bit of information here just about what companies have been doing with regard to COVID. I think I'm just going to skip over this information. If you are interested, I'd be happy to provide it. This is primarily information I gathered from food processing companies who have been, obviously, they have been forced to take some really remarkable steps to try to protect their employees. Large construction projects, as you know, probably know, we have a lot of large construction projects in in Nebraska and the Omaha area specifically. And again, these operations have been really compelled to do a lot of extraordinary things to make sure that their employees are safe. And so that's all these last few slides address, just some of the things that these folks have been doing to try to comply with CDC guidelines. It has been interesting to see. And a lot of companies have not done anything to try to address CDC guidelines, and I get into those facilities as well, interestingly. So it's all across the board. You know, hand washing stations next to outhouses on some construction sites. That's always interesting to see. And then I just had to throw in this one just because it is a safety discussion, at least from my perspective. And, you know, holding the concrete block while your partner cuts it with a quickie saw is always an interesting approach to safety and health. So that brings me to the end of my time. And I'm going to drop my program, and that's it. So as Roger mentioned, if you do have questions, I will try to answer those if I can, or you have my email address. If you would prefer to ask your question at a later time, feel free to do so. So thank you. That didn't really say much, as I rarely ever do. So,
well, Doug, thank you so much. And at this time, we do not have any questions. So I guess that means that you're just an excellent presenter, because
well, I know what it means.
Anticipated everything that everybody would ever ask.
And, yeah, I've been doing this a long time, Roger. I know exactly what that means. But. So yeah, please, if something does come to mind, give me a holler. You know, you guys know how to get a hold of me. So happy to do it. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
All right. Well, thank you so much too, Doug. So, okay, not seeing any questions then, I believe we will move on now to our next speaker. I am happy today to introduce Eric Sturm. Eric has avidly served private industries and agencies offering premier environmental assistance, including expert testimony with a focus on air quality regulatory matters. Eric served in the federal government for EPA, where he oversaw and assisted air permitting agencies in EPA Region 7. And then after being with EPA, Eric founded the ARC, an air regulations consulting firm, in early 2014. And today, Eric is going to be presenting on an update on EPA and NDEE policies and guidance for air. And we're going to basically have two presenters in this time slot. As soon as Eric is done, we'll be going on to Shawn Zablocki, and I will introduce Shawn at that time. So, Eric, if you want to take it away.
Sure thing. Thanks, Roger. I have actually a question for Doug, if we can still do
Sure,
questions.
you bet.
I know a lot of sites have their own coronavirus policies. How have you interacted with OSHA, you know, and making sure that when inspectors come to the site that they follow the site's COVID coronavirus policies before actually starting their inspection?
That's a great question, actually, and everyone should have some level of coronavirus policy. You know, whether you are a very high-risk healthcare facility or a low-risk facility, I think it's important that everyone have some, you know, reasonable degree of program in place. I know that in my experience, OSHA has contacted the facilities before arriving, which is unusual. It's not how those things are typically conducted, but at least in the case of the food processing facilities I work with, they had initiated the inspection virtually, and so they were aware of what steps were being taken by the facility and what steps they would be required to take. As is always the case, or at least should be the case, the OSHA compliance person will at least follow what is dictated to them by the facility. If they require them to wear face coverings, gloves, face shield, additional PPE, whatever that might be, they will typically gladly do that. And if they go into a facility where nothing is being done, maybe they haven't implemented a program at all, they will certainly protect themselves. I don't think they're taking risks at all, to be quite honest. They're very reluctant to go into what they would consider medium to high risk facilities, and they're being very good about complying with the local facilities' expectations.
That's interesting. I think that's great to know too for everybody on the call. Well, thank you for the introduction, Roger, and putting this on, and also for the board for letting us present. So transitioning from Doug's excellent safety slides and presentation to some environmental aspects. I'll start with air, and then Shawn will talk about more of the inspection side and water and other things to consider going on with environmental. I'm Eric Sturm, very happy to be doing this. I know it's a little bit odd for everybody to be doing this from afar, but I think we're making the best of the situation here, and hoping everybody will enjoy just a little bit of update on some Clean Air Act policies and guidance that have come out over the last year, trying to do a good representation of things to be aware of, as it's an ever-changing field when it comes to air. And this last year was no different, really. And in fact, a really good year to be a part of and aware of what's going on. And I want to give some credit to the ARC team here that really helped put together a lot of these slides. We've done similar presentations on this year, one to the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association and then the Fuel Ethanol Workshop. This one is really tailored specifically to Nebraska, so we'll try to focus our time on that. And there are a lot of things, like we said, that happened over the last 12 months, but focusing on what's happened at the NDEE and also what's come out of EPA as far as guidance. I think there are at least 9 areas to be aware of. I mean, there are a lot. We could spend days going over these things, and there are some conferences that do, but we're going to try to give you a very high level look at some things that could affect you, how they happened and why they happened, starting with the source trial policy at NDE that came out earlier this year, an updated way that NDE is going to be doing their non-compliance communication. And I apologize, at some point I might be saying NDEQ. I'm still used to that acronym for the department, so I might switch back and forth. My apologies. They also recently, just a few days ago, came out with their standard and general permit conditions sections 1 and 2. There are some hour average permit limits to be aware of too that NDE has been doing with their permitting. This was the first year of SLICE, and I think it's good to kind of do a year in review to see how SLICE has worked out for 2019 and what to look for the next year. A few administrative matters to be aware of at the department. For EPA, you know, these are 2 agencies that work very close together between the department and EPA, and they'd had some revised policies, which I think are interesting, and you know, it will maybe perhaps depend on how, if the next administration, how they want to handle these things. But for this, it's good to take a temperature of how EPA has viewed things over the last year and how they expect to handle things going forward. I'm going to skip over slides describing ARC for sake of time, but we're located in Lincoln and Omaha. We do work pretty much nationwide and have done some international work as well. We've helped ethanol producers close to 10 states. And for myself, as Roger put it, I actually used to be at EPA Region 7 for 5 years. Please don't hold that against me. I've since been helping private industry very much and been doing so for the last 10 years. So for the first policy to be aware of is the source trial policy from NDE. This came out March 17th through the listserv. And for those not familiar with it, this was an option to evaluate a new process and materials or methods of operation for a limited period of time. So if you had a trial or a project you wanted to try out, you knew you were only going to be doing it for a limited number of time, this policy was the NDE's assistance to help industry do those. As you know, in the ethanol and agribusiness world, these trials are very important to progress the industry and make things more efficient, make production improvements. And so the NDE understood this in some capacity and was giving some leniency for ways that you can do these trials and then figure out a way whether or not you want to keep doing it and how it can actually work with permitting and compliance. Specifically on their output, the why of this, it was NDE's attempt to support operator interest in production and efficiency improvements. And what we want to go through with each source trial policy is maybe let's look at how can this affect Nebraska producers and industry. And so I think most really took this policy as a real positive. It gives you options to make changes as long as you're working with the department beforehand. And a lot of times they'll then navigate the permitting with you, or possibly you can do the trial policy without having to do pre-construction permitting for that, as long as you take into account compliance with existing permits, and then also taking into account stack testing to ensure emission limits are attained. Like with any policy, there are some negative aspects that can arise from this, because non-compliance can always weighed into account. And so this is something to really be cognizant of, that, should your trial result in some sort of, say it blows your emissions right through the roof or something, or maybe it makes a control device fail, the NDE will have to handle it with their enforcement discretion. So it's an interesting aspect. It is, I think, helpful to producers, but it's always a double-edged sword. You might want to take into account, will this trial really give us some area where we might come into a compliance concern? And so that's something to take into account with the source trial policy. NDE also came out with an updated non-compliance communication. And so starting September 1st, about 3 weeks ago, the NDE has chosen to use a letter of non-compliance to communicate when a facility is in violation. In the past, I'm sure people are aware or have seen these different forms of correspondence through emails, phone calls, letters of warning, notices of violation, repairs or corrective action letters or compliance requests. And the reason for that spectrum, I believe, was because there were different areas depending on the severity of violation that NDEQ would use areas of different ways to communicate the violation to the facility. But in this change, in getting away from those different ways of communicating the violation and only going to the LNC, the NDE hopes to bring consistency and fairness to the process. So that I think they want to just be really consistent for communicating these violations. So how will this affect us, the ethanol and agribusiness producers in the state? I think in just testing a temperature for what people think, I think most have viewed this as kind of a negative. And it's no knock on the agency for trying to put something together that will increase, fairness and consistency. I think it's more of just that it's a very sensitive interaction when it comes to compliance and enforcement and interacting with the NDEQ. So when they're using a one tool fits all kind of communication, it can sometimes then maybe confuse or complicate the message that industry is receiving if you're saying you're out of compliance with a certain aspect. And so just by using the LNC for all violations, as you can imagine, maybe there's like a small paperwork violation, or you forgot to sign a document or something that was relatively small that had no harm to the environment. It sounds like the NDE is going to be using these LNCs if you have a small violation that has really no potential for any sort of enforcement. But then they'll use the LNC also if it is having a large possibility for enforcement. So that's the only reason it could lead to some confusion. This is very new. I haven't seen an LNC yet, so I guess we'll see as this rolls out kind of what it looks like and how the NDE will use it. Simultaneously with rolling out that change in communication, there are also two guidance documents NDE put out. And if this presentation is made available later, we actually put links in the presentation so that you can access those. It's inspection tips for regulated facilities and a guide to NDE's return to compliance process, or RTC process. And I think these are very good documents for the most part, and very helpful to walk through and be aware of, as they have some really good information and steps that you should consider. There are some statements within the inspection tips for regulated facilities that you might want to be aware of. Again, the documents are really good as a whole. And then as part of those, there can be some things that might be hard to understand or might be a little bit misleading. But I think, again, the interaction with NDEQ is very sensitive when it comes to inspections. And so you want to take into account different things that you might be doing at your site that might be confidential, and making sure that before you hand over documents to an inspector, you go through the confidentiality process. You also might have internal practices for what you're allowed to release to an inspector. And so it's also good to involve, third-party experts, consultants, or legal counsel to make sure you know what you're allowed to give an inspector, because as everybody should know, that as soon as you give it to them, and if you don't claim confidentiality, it will be a public record. So it's really important to keep that in mind as the inspection tips when the NDE or EPA comes to your site for an inspection. Another part is the third out of the 9 is the standard and general permit conditions. And this is something that NDE started 4 years ago, where conditions 1 and 2 are being updated and standardized to make it consistent for everybody, no matter what your source is. And it's an attempt to really unify permit requirements, and NDE committed to making sure that these get updated every now and then. I think this is our 3rd or 4th iteration that we've seen from NDE. So it's really important, as most permits that are issued to you have 3 or 4 sections to them. So this can be half or 66% of your permit that is up for comment. And this started in January of this year, and it just recently got finalized September 21st, so just about a week ago. And how is this going to affect you? Again, it's a major part of your permit, the standard and general conditions 1 and 2. And what NDE had proposed as part of its updates was kind of a little bit controversial, or at least I think a lot of industry was in opposition to it, was the Federal Rule Applicability Review, the FRAR or FRAR. This, I believe, was an attempt from the department to require producers to update the NDE when an applicable requirement changes with a federal new source performance standard or national emissions standard for hazardous air pollutant. And so these are very complex, convoluted rules, and the NSPSs and NESHAPs can be very difficult to understand. And so, and there are a lot of compliance methodologies as well. So EPA purposely wrote these NSPSs and NESHAPs to give you multiple options on how you can demonstrate compliance. And so what we believe the FR was trying to get at was, conveying how you were going to be demonstrating compliance and giving the NDEQ some adequate advance notice of how you're going to be doing that. But I think the NDE received a lot of comments on this, and they just put out the response to comments about a week ago, and they're withdrawing this FR proposal. I think because of all the opposition, ARC, we commented against it, and a lot of industry did, because I think the NSPSs and NESHAPs really already have the notification procedures in their general conditions. So, I think the NSPSs and NESHAPs already have a way of notifying the NDE, but I think in their response to comments, they did say they're still going to look to explore other avenues on how they can kind of standardize ways of making sure that they're aware of how all facilities are in compliance with their NSPSs and NESHAPs. So the first 3 that we've gone over have really been compliance related, and I guess the 3rd was also permitting. The 4th here is permitting as well. And starting in roughly 2020, we noticed the NDE permitting group was changing in operating permits and construction permits, the permitted limit averaging period for emission limits. Oftentimes this would be a table in section 3 of your permit, where it would say 3-hour average for the permitted limited averaging period. Now it looks like NDE is putting 1 hour in a lot of permits that we've seen. As to the why for this change kind of in policy, we asked NDE a few times, and they indicated that there was some confusion amongst industry on whether their limits were based on an hour or if they could average them out over 3 hours during the operation. So I think it's more of a communication for what's in your permit. to how you're allowed to operate when you have a pound per hour emission limit. And so to avoid kind of the confusion there, they've been changing that 3 hour to 1 hour. Again, how will this affect us? The 1 hour average period is, I guess it's a little, again, maybe confusing to follow, but to an extent, this could have a very negative effect and maybe a convoluted effect as well when doing stack testing or your compliance demonstration. Because keep in mind, all EPA stack test methodologies allow for a 3 hour average to demonstrate compliance for your pound per hour limit. So, and that's just because there is inherent variability in operations, there's inherent variability in stack testing. And so you get 3 numbers, and then that's how you set kind of what your emissions were over the stack testing period. If we only say 1 hour in the permits, I guess it could lead an inspector or someone to say, well, if you tested here and here and here, well, if your first one was really high, you're out of compliance. But that's not really the case, because the methodology for stack testing is you get 3 tests, at least 3 tests. It could be many more. So I think this is something to really be aware of. If it's inserted into your permit, it's important to make sure that you comment, take a look at it. A lot of these will be case by case, because what's the limit? How many stack tests should you get? What is the compliance demonstration, monitoring, and record keeping to ensure that you're meeting your pound per hour limit? And maybe everybody's favorite topic or least favorite topic is the slice. If you're not familiar with this, this is a state and local emissions inventory system. So for reporting year 2018, this was optional. So starting last year, you were allowed to get into Slice and edit your inventory and units and actually report. Starting this year in 2020, the ND actually required that emissions be submitted online for reporting year 2019, and the due date was March 31st, 2020. As to why the switch, Slice is not new. Slice has been around and used for other states for almost a decade. And it's a pretty good system. It's the most commonly used online reporting system. And so ND adopting it is probably a step in the right direction. And so it's supposed to streamline kind of data processing and public access to emissions data. And how has this affected industry? And so, you know, we talked to a number of people in the state about how Slice has been going for this first year. And Slice is not perfect. You know, it's a programming software, and it tries to go to each state and be specific for the state, but then also kind of be the same for all other states. And so we had much experience with it and working with it in other states. And Nebraska did have some hiccups going through in its first year that will be important to work through in 2021. The biggest thing that we saw was most inventories and units were set up incorrectly, and this took a lot of time to fix. So if you got in, say, March 30th of a deadline on March 31st, you might have noticed that some of your emission units were labeled wrong. Maybe some of their stack parameters were wrong, or had like the wrong control device. And that's just because, you know, it's really the facility's obligation to be able to go in and make sure that your units are correct. So it was important to get in early and often to make sure that you could fix the inventories and make those correctly. Some other areas too, you know, there can be concern of double counting for HAPs and VOCs when there are VOCs that are HAPs and HAPs that are VOCs. And so it's important to separate those out. That can be a little bit confusing within the Slice system, but we knew that from other states having the same problem. Along with when you have excess emission events and normal emissions, those can be a little bit difficult to report as well. And since April of 2020, we have noticed in talking with a few folks and following what the ND puts on their web, they have actually sent out notices of violation, where if you did not use Slice or you did not correctly report your Slice for your emissions of 2019, they have sent NOVs saying you need to submit accordingly or there could be enforcement. Some administrative changes too, and I don't want to step on Jim Macy's toes here, so I could probably go over this pretty quickly, but something to be aware of, and used to be a pain before, was always making sure that you had to submit the wet original copies for things that needed to be submitted to NDE. They have been accepting the scan copies. So if you have a scan of a signature that you want to submit, that's been a useful thing. That just started in 2020. Todd Ellis, unfortunately, went into retirement. He was the air compliance unit supervisor, and Brad Prachel has filled his spot in the interim while they're looking for a replacement. Also, Gary Buttermore with the NDE, he was the air permitting section supervisor. He retired, and it looks like they're not planning to fill his role, is my understanding, but Dave Christensen has stepped up and done a lot of the duties that Gary Buttermore was doing. It looks like we're about 25 minutes in. I can go over quickly the EPA guidance, and these slides will be made available later too, so perhaps you can email or ask questions afterwards about the EPA guidance that we'll go over really quickly. But it's important to know that Executive Order 13891 actually came out clarifying what even is governmental guidance documents, and they're interpretive memoranda, policy statements, manuals, and advisories. These are rules of internal agency procedures and practices. It's important to note that the executive orders, these are not law or regulation. They're just used to navigate kind of gray areas where there are no rules clarifying certain situations. But it's important to note that if guidances and policies are put into your permit and the permit is issued, then it pretty much acts like a regulation, because it's an assigned document that you must comply with. And so EPA updated its ambient air policy. They used to require fence and other physical barriers to demonstrate where your property boundary was. Administrator Wheeler said that doesn't make sense anymore. You should be able to use things like signage, drones, security systems, and other things like that to extend your property boundary or better establish it, as opposed to using a fence. How this could affect you: if you have a permit limit based on modeling, or are required to use a fence or have a certain stack height requirement, a lot of these can change based on this type of guidance. And so expanding where the ambient air starts for what the public can breathe in can really change your permit quite a bit. Another memo that came out was begin actual construction. This talks about what you're allowed to do before your permit is issued. And so this was an EPA guidance that just came out in 2020, and some states are still looking at it to see what it means, but it really focuses on what you can start construction on while you're waiting for your permit. I know a lot of companies have been in the situation where they want to start construction and they're losing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars waiting to start construction because they're waiting on their air permit. This memorandum really went through and looked at some tests you can do that should be allowed for you to start construction on some units while you're waiting for your permit. It goes against kind of a historical interpretation where EPA looked at the entire stationary source. This goes more on a unit by unit basis. And it really goes against rules and memoranda that EPA has been writing since the early 80s. So it's something to take a look at, and it's pretty interesting. How could it affect you is that it could perhaps alleviate a construction situation on what you might be able to start construction with. EPA definitely notes here though in this that it's really state by state policy on how you want to be able to start construction, and a lot of states will handle that accordingly. So coordination with the NDE would be ultimately one of the most important things you could do if you need to start construction on some things. And of course there is a variance process that the NDE has so that you can do this, but this EPA guidance is kind of giving folks a more aggressive way to look at what you can do while you're waiting for your permit. We can breeze over, I think, the coronavirus enforcement discretion. This was came out in March 26th of 2020, and it spanned really from about March to the end of August, looking at how EPA was going to implement some enforcement discretion. They were really, this was something they almost had to do, because when you have another governmental agency like the CDC saying you have to separate, you have to social distance, well, this is going to make a lot of your compliance obligations very difficult if not impossible, at your site. And so they came out with a 7-page document explaining how they're going to handle enforcement during coronavirus pandemic. But the biggest one to be aware of is that the enforcement discretion, section A1 of the general conditions says entities should make every effort to comply with their environmental compliance obligations. So every effort to do so. But to the extent coronavirus was preventing you from meeting any of your permit requirements, then there are some things to document. So if compliance is not reasonably practicable, then there are steps A through E that you must do. And it involves a lot of documentation, a lot of specific nature addressing of why you are not able to meet your compliance obligation. And so there are a lot of things to do to document this, involving, you know, some return to compliance and addressing really how coronavirus affected it. And then the rest of the policy does go on in some other areas to talk about what EPA will enforce on and what they might seek penalty for. And a lot of it was, you know, we're not trying to seek for paperwork violations, but if there is a cause or harm to the environment or public health, they will still seek penalty for those things. And then the last one that came out was kind of a reinterpretation of the term adjacent. So when considering what's all part of a single stationary source, there is a contiguous adjacent aspect. Do you have common ownership? And you know, are you part of the same industrial classification code? And adjacent has always been one that's been really confusing, because some determinations say you can be a mile apart, some say it's half a mile. States have different ways of handling this, but most EPA memos in the past until now talked about a functional interrelatedness, where if you have some sort of relation or a but-for or way that you are connected to another source, then you might be considered one stationary source, even if you're very far away. This memo from EPA really throws that out. It says, you know, there shouldn't be this functional interrelatedness or anything where if they're a mile away, you should still be permitted. The most common thing that we could see with this group would be a grain elevator located next to maybe an ethanol plant or some or other facility. Well, if it's a mile away, does it make sense that they should be permitted as one stationary source? What this memo says is no, not so much. You know, it's too far away, and they're going back to more of a plain definition of what it means to be adjacent. So that's the big way that this could affect you. If your permit is combined with another, then it is possible with this new interpretation of adjacent that if it's not right next door and it's further away and it is, you know, separately owned and under a different classification code, there are a lot of ways that you could perhaps figure out permitting to get those separated. I think we can take some questions now, or we should probably wait until after Sean's, but you can also email questions to us if you would like.
And Eric, at this time, we have not received any questions. We've got a quiet group here today. So what we'll do is, Sean, we'll go ahead and let you do your presentation. I'll introduce you here. And again, I want to remind everybody that as you put your questions in, to direct them to me. We want to keep these questions anonymous, and so that way you're free to ask whatever it is you want to ask. So don't hesitate to go ahead and put your questions in, and then we'll handle them once Sean is done with his. So at this point then, Eric, thank you very much for your presentation. And Sean, I'll go ahead and introduce you here. Shawn Zablocki has over 25 years of experience in working in all aspects of environmental health and safety management. Before starting Z2, he spent 18 years in the EHS field. Sean has a BS in chemical engineering and a law degree, and those are both from the University of Toledo, and he is a professional engineer registered in 7 states. Today, Sean is going to be presenting on an update on environmental inspections from EPA and NDEE. So Sean, welcome, and take it away.
Thanks, Roger. First of all, I apologize for what my wife affectionately calls my smoky eye. I took a bit of a tumble at the gym last week and caught the business end of a countertop, so sorry for the gross appearance this morning or this afternoon, but I'll try and keep this brief and keep us on schedule, but I just wanted to take a few minutes and go over what's going on with some agency inspections during the COVID crisis we're in right now. I've been part of a couple inspections both on the federal and state level, and just wanted to share those experiences with you guys. One was an FRP, kind of a new version of the GUI exercises that's being done totally remotely, and then some just how the state's kind of handling environmental inspections. So first of all, during the last year, inspections are still occurring. We're not getting off the hook and not getting inspected because of the virus. The agency is just trying to minimize the time they're on site and take a bit of a more focused approach and a bit of a hybrid approach, but rest assured they are still doing inspections. So the first one I took part in Region 5 actually. They are undertaking a pilot program for all the EPA regions for virtual exercises. They're calling it an off-site compliance monitoring exercise in lieu of a government unannounced inspection exercise. And essentially, they're doing everything they would do for a GUI drill, with the exception of the deployment, and doing them remotely. They're still technically unannounced. However, in this case, we got an email from the regional coordinator about 2 weeks in advance to say the site may be selected for an inspection. And then the day of the drill, they sent out a Teams meeting invite and set up the drill and went about it that way. So what did I do here? They did, when they sent out the email, they kind of put out a punch list of the items in the facility response plan that they wanted to go over during the exercise or inspection or drill, whatever you want to call it. First part of that scenario was to go through and basically review the FRP, make sure the qualified individuals were aware of what's in the plan. In this case, it was a bit frustrating in that they gave us that information ahead of time. We had a prep call to go over with the qualified individuals, say, look, make sure you're aware of these sections of the plan, be aware where to find it. And during the live drill, they still took a lot of time to go through and actually fish through the FRP to find those specific items and answer questions. Albeit Alex was very hospitable, was a new site, newly developed FRP for the site. He was pretty patient with that, but if you get the opportunity to prepare for an unannounced inspection, I certainly encourage you to do so. Here, I think I got my slides mixed up here. So the day of the exercise, again, EPA sends a calendar invite for a Teams meeting. The first part was to discuss the FRP. Second part was the actual virtual response exercise. That exercise, the way they do it, they're basically using the small scale release. So a 2,100 gallon release that reaches a waterway. They'll go through your FRP. They'll either use the small scale release you have in that scenario. They may actually come up with something. They may come up with something on their own. They basically say, okay, here's a scenario you have. You had a release that during loadout, 2,100 gallons reached the waterway. Start your response activity. And they went through and discussed, okay, who's going to be responsible for calling and making the agency notifications, who would be coordinating the activity on site, just so they understood who's playing what roles within the corporation, and then allowed you to kind of do your response virtually. So what did that mean? It means, so when you make your agency notifications, you go down your call list and you document calling the emergency response center, you document calling the LAPC, document all the phone calls that you make. You call your spill response contractor, assuming you have one, to assist in the spill, and they provide an email or documentation as far as what their deployment time would be to get to the site, where they would deploy boom in your specific scenario. In this case, they also wanted us to go down the entire 27-hour planning distance, so the site wasn't quite prepared for that, but they allowed the site to update their response plan accordingly. So they want, basically go through that, and then you provide that documentation back to EPA, and then they have a follow-up call a couple days later to go over their observations on how you handled the response. Again, be prepared to discuss the boom deployment for the entire planning distance. That kind of caught me by surprise when I was developing the plans and coordinating with FRP. They were focused on the first hour response to the response contractor got there, but they still wanted the response contractor to have deployment locations identified for the entire planning distance so they could access those areas and make sure they had access to them. One thing to point out, while these are being done currently in lieu of the GUI drills, they do not reset the 3-year clock. If you had a true unannounced, government unannounced inspection exercise and EPA stopped out of your doorstep today to do that, you go through the exercise, you don't have to do it again for 3 years. In this case, since they're being done remotely and you're not deploying boom, it does not reset your 3-year clock. So it's certainly possible you could have one of these this year or next year. And if you did have that, you could also still be on the hook for a government unannounced exercise a year or two later and not have to wait 3 years. EPA did provide the option if the facility wanted to have the response contractor come out and go through the whole deployment, they could do that. I don't think most places are going to do that for a remote exercise, but they did provide that option. And then just quickly on the state inspections, again, states are still doing inspections as well. Routine inspections are being conducted with basically a hybrid approach. Again, the mindset here is to minimize the time on site. So instead of coming out for 4, 6, or 8 hours and taking up a whole day on site, they're trying to reserve the site time for doing a site inspection and ask questions and documentation. So what that's requiring them to do is basically notify the site ahead of time. We're going to do a haz waste inspection. We're going to do a wastewater inspection. Please send us they'll give you the document request list, have you send the documents over. They'll usually have a phone call to go over the documents that you sent, see if there's any questions to make sure that you're getting them what they want to see. They will review those documents, and then a week or two later, they'll plan a on-site visit where they come out for a shorter period of time, usually 1.5 hours to 2 hours. That site visit will involve going over any questions they have from the initial documents that you supplied, seeing if anything's missing, getting a plan in place to get the additional documentation to the agency, and then actually going through and doing the site visit, walkthrough, and observation portion of the inspection. After that, you still have your closeout meeting, kind of go over what they observed during the document review as well as the site walkthrough, and then you get your follow-up report. So again, kind of the same exercise, it's just instead of the document review being on site and them sitting in your conference room doing that with you entertaining them, you're sending the state the documents. They're doing a lot of their document review remotely from their office or home office or wherever they're working nowadays, and then coming on site and focusing the site time for the site inspections. So again, try to keep it pretty brief. Any questions, we'll let Roger address those. Thank you.
And Shawn, we still have not had any questions come in. I'm a little surprised at that. I thought we would have some questions, and I'll tell the both of you, Shawn and Eric, just like I told Doug, you covered the topic so well that you anticipated what everybody was wanting to learn about, and they have no questions on it. So you've done well. So we will leave it up to you. If you still want to, during the rest of the presentation here, as we finish out on our last speaker, if you want to submit some questions to Shawn or Eric or to Doug, you're more than welcome to continue to go ahead and do that. You can submit those questions directly to me on those. So with that, Shawn and Eric, thank you very much for the information that you've given us today. All right, now we are going to move on with a presentation by Director Jim Macy, but we're going to change things up a little bit here now. You've been listening to me for the whole part of this presentation so far, and it's time to get somebody who's a little bit younger and a little bit better looking on here in order to be the moderator now. So I'm happy to introduce Hunter Floodman. Hunter is going to be coming on, and he will introduce Jim here in just a few minutes, but in case you don't know Hunter, I want to give Hunter just a little bit of a introduction here. Hunter is Assistant Professor of Practice in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Hunter earned his PhD from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 2013. Hunter is also a very valued member of the Nebraska Ethanol Board and serves as the NEB's technical advisor. So with that, Hunter, I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Roger. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're coming through loud and clear.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Roger. And if you have questions on this last speaker, Director Macy, I'm just going to ask that you send them in the chat directly to me instead of Roger. And then at the end of Jim's talk,
I'll ask those questions and he can address those.
Thank you for pointing that out, Hunter. I completely forgot to designate that. So thank you.
Sure, no problem. So I'm not going to take up any more time, but I am going to introduce our next speaker. I think we all know him, Director Jim Macy. And Jim has been director of the DEQ since 2015 until it merged with the Nebraska Department of Energy in 2019. He's now director of those merged agencies. Prior to coming to Nebraska and serving as the director of the DEQ, he worked in a variety of capacities with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And he also was a consultant with Environmental Works, Inc. in Kansas City. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and also a Master's in Vocational and Technical Education from the University of Missouri-Columbia. He's received numerous awards and also serves on numerous boards. And he currently serves as president of the Environmental Council of the States, co-chair of the Electronic Enterprise Leadership Council, vice chair of the Nebraska Environmental Trust, and he is also a board member of the Western States Water Council. And so, Jim, looking forward to your update as always, and I'll let you take it away.
All right. Thank you, Hunter. Thank you, Roger, and everyone. And before I get started here, I just wanted to take a moment and thank everybody in the ethanol industry. Starting in spring, and I guess we all kind of started this COVID-19 game about the same time, and I recall it sometime after tax day, right? And we're all kind of hearing rumors, and I started getting some really good quality calls from a number of ethanol plants interested in trying to develop hand sanitizer. And then Chief of Staff Meltenberger designated me the go-to contact for hand sanitizer for the state of Nebraska. And boy, was that really was a lot of fun. I think if y'all want to throw like a federal and a state agency though under the bus, I'd really like you to look at the FDA process instead of ours. Some of those of you that have been through the sanitizing formulation mix and all that process, you may be chuckling now. Joe Oswald, I see you kind of laughing. I want to give a shout out to a couple of you, and not to single any of you out, but Joe, I did call Carl, and for those of you that probably don't know, there's only a couple of plants in Nebraska that make or capture CO2 as a byproduct. I know you don't make a ton of money on this thing, but I tell you what, about let's see, about May, June timeframe, if you had any on hand, and there was a lot of people out there looking for it. It's a big chemical use in some of the wastewater and drinking water treatment technologies, hospitals, and everybody was looking for it because it was in short supply. So that part of the game was tough. E. Adams has a side business or a dotted line relationship. Joe, you can probably explain it better to others, but you all had a methodology for capture, and I think Husker, not in the Nebraska facility, but over in an Iowa facility, was looking at it. And Des Moines, if you follow the Des Moines Water Treatment Works, all the problems that they had there, they were out and looking to buy. So thanks everybody in the just categories you all as the team ethanol producers and the team sanitizing producers. I know a number of you tried that. You had to switch up columns and get the gas smell out of your product, and you really did a great job. I know Hunter and his team over at the universities you know, they had a heck of a thing going on there. I know Green Plains had a lot to do with that, and there's a lot of others that I'm probably missing out on without really preparing any statements on this. But the state of Nebraska owes a lot of you, if not all of you, a great debt of gratitude. You kept a lot of schools and in industries and especially those food processing facilities going at a time when Director Wellman and I were wondering how many animal mortalities we're going to have, because how big of fat hogs can you store on site for how long before they won't fit in the processing plant, right? So you came through in really tough times, and again, thank you for that. This isn't over, and a lot of you found a little niche market in this in these tough times, and wish you luck with that. You know, I'm now a connoisseur of hand sanitizers when I go from place to place. We want to see how smooth it feels on the hand, if it's sticky or not, if it evaporates pretty fast. I mean, there's a lot of science and consumer satisfaction to that product. So again, thank you. You're not going to get all the accolades you deserve on that, but from somebody that kind of sort of at a very remote distance lived it with you for a little bit, man, my hat's off to you. You did a hell of a good job in producing a product that everybody wanted. Everybody wanted hand sanitizer, right? And you did a great job with that, and I thank you. So I can't see any of you now. Can you see this? Is that good?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. So I'm gonna. Okay. Thank you again. I can't see you, but that's probably good for my sake. And let's see how this goes. So this should not be new news to you. Our agency vision: we want to be responsive, use common sense and problem solving, be assistance focused. I believe the local people solve local problems. We want to help create opportunity through more effective, more efficient, and customer-focused state government, and that the governor that is his and our shared vision on how we run things in Nebraska state government. I do want to share something with you that we're changing up a little bit, and Eric talked just a little bit about the part that he knew about, and not many people know about the rest that I'm going to disclose to you. And then there's another component to this that's yet to be painted on the walls. But this is today, and I know this slide says 17. So we've had this type of an organization, a stovepiped organization based around the structure of divisions based on land, air, waste, etc. Right, and that's pretty common with a lot of states. There are a few that are doing something a little bit different, and I want to show you what that looks like in today's in terms of people, where people have been and what they're doing, and I think Eric shared that we had a couple retirements. We've got a couple more retirements coming up in some division areas, and with that avails us to some opportunities that you don't normally have. And then if you haven't outwardly heard, we're moving from, like, it seems like we're in 16 different locations. We're really just in the atrium, on a couple of floors in the atrium. We're in 1111 Lincoln Mall that was pretty significantly damaged by the riots in Lincoln earlier this year. We're in an energy office, the old executive building, and there's part of the energy office staff and part of the outreach and assistance staff are in that building. And then we have the Van Dorn building that holds our Title 200 petroleum equipment to do renovation work, upgrade, treated soil and air sparging, water separating, all that equipment's out at Van Dorn with our biological lab for sampling and stream assessment, and then we have a little conference room out there too. So what we're going to do, and we're going to do some things internal that's going to not affect you really. And really, this next statement, it's not really going to affect you because you're going to be working pretty steadily with the same people that you've been working with. So like in the case of Buttermore, he retired. Sarah Starowska has done the compliant or the CP work on construction permit work on the side, leading that team. She is a designated lead permanent now on construction permitting process. And then Dave Christensen is the lead on the operating permit side of that. Both have just done phenomenal work with regard to getting a legally enforceable and quick product out the door. I think we're getting a product out the door after technical review. Let me think about this. For 75% of the time, 95 days or less. And the last that I asked and heard was we had hit the 88, 87 day area a couple weeks ago. So that ebbs and flows with the complexity of permits that come in and the amount of comments and if they get stuck someplace. Just a great job on that part. And then on Dave's part, he had a backlog that was about the size of Mount Rushmore. It was huge. And they brought that down to under 25, I think is the last that I heard. So the phenomenal job of like going from 150 to 25 in the last couple of years. And it's been a true team effort between the CP team and the OP team. There's been some teammates that have helped each other out in that process. And that's great. That's what we look for. And we try to practice that in process improvement, and that's been fun. And we look for more of that to continue. So now what this next slide is something that you're all gonna probably see a little bit more visually starting December 1. So basically we're taking our organizational structure as it is now in more divisions based on a division of water, wastewater, drinking water, etc. And we're going to put that on its side, and we're going to go to divisions based on function, engineering and permitting, aid in planning and assistance, compliance and inspection. The drinking water and groundwater is going to be pretty much the same. We've got that dotted line MOU with HHS and us, but we'll have a monitoring and remediation division, and then we'll have the administration division that will hold some of our behind the scenes stuff like budget and fiscal and things like that, and then records. All that runs the IIS system by which you as consultants enjoy sitting at home drinking coffee and reviewing old DEQ records and new DEE records. So that's something that very few states in the nation have, that a level of transparency and accessibility. We in Nebraska are proud of that. It really saved our bacon during the COVID-19 experience that we had. And we're looking forward to enhancing that even more and, doing good things with that. So I'm going to try to slip through this a little bit quicker and play a little bit of catch up, but that's going to be an important thing. I think the division people's names are probably going to change of where you have been working with in the past, because we're going to change up how that's managed at the top. But functionally, you're going to be working with the same teammates that you've always worked with throughout your industrial relationship with the agency, and I think it's going to be a better product, because let's just have some facility that has multiple jurisdictional presences in the state, and maybe has multiple parts of that jurisdictional unit that deal in water and waste and air and solid waste and maybe some drinking water, and you're dealing with 4 or 5 different people within that, and now and say you're bringing in some new part of your organization, and you want to look at engineering. Now what we are hoping is that we have a more holistic methodology to looking at your permit requirements, have a left hand knowing what the right hand's doing, approach to servicing you as a customer and getting you a better product. So that's what we're really excited about. The team here is excited about doing this. We're going to be executing this about the time we move into our new location, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I want to give you a little bit more, and I'm not adept enough to go to I've got the slide handout, or a separate handout that I'll tell you, I'll give that to Jessica and Roger, and they can get you a copy of what Eric touted as that those brochures that were good. He talked a little critically about our inspection, maybe the process, and then this compliance process. Here's the deal on this, and this how it relates to this letter of non-compliance. So here's what we're thinking about this, and see if this makes sense to you. We had parts of our organization in the same program would have a find it, fix it letter, a notice of violation, a letter of warning, and maybe another instrument that gave a facility or a permit holder notice that something was wrong, something needed fixing, something needed to happen. And what we saw from the agency standpoint is a lot of confusion if you had again a multiple jurisdictional issue with one company working on multiple permits within that company within the agency. So we had some time during the COVID-19 experience. I wanted to consolidate the way that we're thinking about how we notify folks if they're not in compliance, and then standardize the time frames throughout the agency about, hey, how long are we going to work with you towards achieving that compliance goal? And that's what our goal has always been, and will continue to always be, to keep you all in compliance. And what confuses that is if you get 4 or 5 different letters that say 4 or 5 different things about how long it's going to take you to get in compliance, or how long we're going to wait before we do whatever next step we're going to do. So we looked at that and had a lot of team effort throughout the agency in trying to figure that out, and put it down in a logical process, and then offer some fact sheets. We're going to be doing a lot of webinars on this here in the next month or two, and giving you all a little bit more light at the end of the tunnel about what this means. It really shouldn't mean much more than we're going to be more consistent in our approach with getting you back into a compliance. And if you're in the mindset that you want to be in compliance, all you have to do is talk to your compliance officer and let them know. And then we draw up a path to that compliance. And once that's established and you're following that, we're good to go. And that's how it's been in a very simplistic manner in the past. That's not going to change. We're not going to immediately throw you over to the Attorney General's office with this, but we are going to define better when we're going to stop doing the assistance part of this, and when you've got to get to a point where, hey, you're going to write something down, you're going to tell us how you're going to get there. Those plans can change, and we have methodologies for changing those plans. But we need to not be working endlessly with facilities that maybe don't want to be in compliance. And that's been a challenge for us. The ethanol industry has not been like this at all. And we have a high degree of compliance within the industry, and we would expect that would maintain that way. So don't be too scared about this. It's okay to ask questions, and we want to be open and transparent about what we're doing. But that's the reason why we had too many ways of saying you're out of compliance. We wanted to get those all consolidated, and we hope that this will be a better product. So I'll get off that topic and on to the next. So it leads to a question that I don't know if I need an answer to this today, but it's something that I want you to be thinking about a little bit is, what value would you place on a very predictable permitting process? And if the department, the NDEE, could streamline further to close in on maybe a 45 to 60-day state permit, like a synthetic minor, not a Title V permit, but something the state operates. What kind of value would that be to the industry? If you could have a predictable system by which you would almost be guaranteed a permit, and we could talk 45 to 60 days with or without public notice. Be thinking about that, and maybe that's something you want to chew on for a day or two and send Roger or Jessica an email on, and or even pick up the phone and talk to me about. I'm giving some thought to that, and don't know that I have any answers on that right yet, but we're always looking at continuous process improvement, and we're thinking about some things like that. So just I'll throw that out there as a interesting tidbit. We've done a lot with regard to how we're communicating. I think this particular document started with the floods and then transferred over to the bomb cyclone that we had in 2019. You could have blown me over with a brick with this COVID-19. It's just really important that we continue to have good documentation and communication, good fact sheets. If you have ideas where we could prop that up, be glad to hear that. We're working really hard on doing more things like cross-agency meetings. We work a lot with some agencies outside the state on like some of the fire issues that are going on down in Kansas. That's a good tool. We want them to keep. It does cause us some problems. So we're looking at maybe how we can lean that up a little bit and figure that out a little bit better. We've been really bought into the Lean Six Sigma process improvement at the agency. We've got a number of staff that are executive green belts. We are instituting a lot of yellow belt training throughout the agency. We have a process, certified lean leader process that we're given to non-supervisor. Matt Turco had that and helped us out with a fact sheet exercise that I think has been very valuable for your industry. So we're continuing to try to prop those things up and give our teammates a chance to better themselves. We see that as a great way to do this. we started out with, I give Brad Prachel some kudos on this, that he started doing some Skype huddles with our outstate teammates that are out in different counties, right? What we kind of call our regional offices. And, you know, just because we had a couple of supervisors kind of know how to do that, that really, we leaned on them during this COVID-19 experience and trying to keep our team kind of communicating together and working together. And we really leaned on teammates like Brad and others that have been using that Skype tool for us that hadn't been and didn't know what a Zoom meeting was. That's just been valuable, and Brad's even taken that to another level with EPA and a part of a nationwide review committee looking at maybe can we do some of these virtual inspections and make them count as real inspections. And you know, there's a good thing that goes along with that in terms of technology and time savings, but just, you know, getting around, and maybe there's people that we don't have to really go out and see because, you know, there's a level of trust and you're doing a good job. And then there's other places where we might want to actually go physically and be. So if we could use this Zoom thing and kind of telecommute into an inspection and getting some of those things done, that'd be good, and probably save the state a lot of money, and we could all be better for that. We're continuing to work on this process improvement. When we brought the energy office into the agency, they really didn't have the process improvement stuff and the online presence that the rest of the agency had. So we're kind of making up some time with that. We had some great plans with that until COVID hit, and we're a little bit behind on that. But we're gonna catch up on that work, and you know, we're gonna make it better. So more to come on that. Wanted to give you a little update on the VW fund. This is what our business plan was for VW, about 25% in school buses. We started out at 10% on the EV charging front. We upped that to 15. We had a clean diesel DERA type program. And there's a lot of irrigation engines that went from the dirty diesel to clean electric or propane, and we would pull the lines and the power lines and then that technology of changing those motors out. That was part of that program. That was a greatly accepted and a pretty active program. We had this wild card area of eligible actions based on demand to where those could fund any of these others except for administrative use, and for anything, we couldn't do anything more than 15%. So we did pull the other 5% from this to make that EV 15% instead of 10. And then we're capped out at 10% on the and the buses, and we did let's see, we did two. I think Lincoln's getting a couple electric buses, and then Omaha had some CNG buses. So that's working out well. This next slide's just, I apologize, it's a little outdated, but so the DERA, we're up to about 2 million in the DERA area. We've capped out on the school buses, the transit buses, the EV charging station. It doesn't show, but we have really spent all the money that we're going to spend in that area. We're less than 3% in our administrative area. So this next couple of years we'll be spending down, I don't know if you see my mouse, but we'll be spending down this eligible actions by demand, and likely that will supplement this DERA engine program, and in things like you could use that for like garbage trucks, fleet truck type of things. The irrigation systems will still be eligible for things like that. But we're nearing the end of the process where we're going to be in this VW funding. My goal was to get in it quickly. Randy Smith's done a great job with that, and then get the plan identified, get it out, the money out to the people that apply and deserve it, and then get done. And we're in the getting done part of that right now. So things are going good. We do have this Grow Nebraska team, so we're happy to have our teammates on that. We need to update the slide a bit because we've got a couple of people that aren't with us anymore on this slide, including one from DED that just went someplace else. So Jason Guernsey's down in, I think, another area outside of state government, but still in the game of economic development. And we'll be looking for his replacement. And then Todd Ellis and Brian McManus and Gary Buttermore have all retired off of this. So I'm sorry, I need to update this slide a little bit. But we do still have an active team, and they're still working to work with facilities when they want to come into the state. We'll sit down with them. We'll go through what permitting processes they need and help them execute on that. So we're timely, they're timely in application. We understand what's going on, and we all move forward together. Really quickly, in the energy part of this, we've got this dollar in energy savings and loan program. It is just a power horse. We've done about $350 million, and this slide's a little old, so we're probably up to about $360 million now in projects for like windows and doors, HVAC systems. We've loaned money to schools, and Lincoln got some money for light replacements here in town, LED light replacements. We've done some home loans, believe it or not, for low energy efficiency housing. So it's really a dynamic program. It works with only Nebraska chartered banks and savings and loans. So not Wells Fargo, not Bank of America, but just the chartered banks in Nebraska. They get they know their customer well. They work well. We do things different in Nebraska, and that's why this thing's worked so well. So we're really happy to keep this project going on, and it's really exciting to be able to assist during the ice storm and the floods that followed the ice storm. We actually lowered the interest rate to 1%. The bank still made money. People still got a great product. We did about $10 million worth of projects during that time frame. So helped a lot of people out with that. So we're happy to do that. And this gives a little area of kind of what we've done over the years in ag projects, commercial clients, industrial clients, government clients, and then transportation, telecommunications, wind, air, soil, solar, and all that. So it's a very diverse portfolio that's out there. Finally, I'll wrap up really quick. Roger's probably chomping at his Zoom meeting bit here. This is a picture of what we're going to be in, the architectural drawing of the new Fallbrook office building, and this is the front view of that building, and then this is the back view of that architectural building, and this is a copy of that about 4 or 5 days ago. So they're putting in plantings and trees, and most of the parking lots are paved, and they're tidying up inside, and they've got all the brickwork done on the outside now. There's some infrastructure stuff that they still got to put together, but we're really getting close. And close means that we're going to be moving the cubes for our teammates in November, the month of November. We're going to be figuring out how we do business and tear down some cubes. We've got a bunch of cubes that have been recovered off of the 6th floor, and they're ready to go. So we're going to be hustling during the month of November. We're still going to be working the month of November, and it's going to be a challenge, but we've got a great team here, and we're going to be able to do it all and get into this new facility where we'll all be on one floor together. And then we'll have about 3/4 of the garden or the basement level where the Title 200 equipment will be. I don't believe I have a slide of that, but they'll have all that equipment down there. We've got all our big conference rooms. The EQC has a big meeting room that will hold our council meetings. You won't be coming to the Cornhusker, the Marriott, to have our EQC council meetings, but you'll be able to park right out front. You won't have to plug your meter or worry about time on that, and that's going to be a good thing for our team. And it's going to be a good thing for you because we're going to be just right off the interstate. We'll be able to get out to your facility and give you some assistance and help you. We're going to be able for you to come in to us and not worry about where you're going to have to park downtown. There's some eating establishments out there, and I'm sure that there's going to be some more grow up once we get in and get settled. So we're pretty excited about this because this building has changed a lot since I think this was a March photograph. And there's been a lot of progress out there on that building. We're going to get into this on a long-term basis. And a lot of you are sitting out there scratching your head thinking, geez, in this time of crisis and day and age and cost savings, and how the heck do you do this? Well, I'll tell you how we did this. We got a 20-year lease on this thing. And we're starting out that 20-year lease at the same rate that we're doing this next cycle on the atrium. So we're about a little over $17, maybe $17.60, $17.70. I forget what it is exactly. I know it's less than $18 a square foot. And we're doing an incremental, you know how they'll get a little bit more money over time. We cost our tenant improvements, which were very, very modest tenant improvements over the first 10 years of that lease at 0% interest. So that'll left us some opportunity costs to do some other things with regard to process improvement and getting our forms online and you know, continuing that good quality work for all Nebraskans. And now here in a couple of months, we're not going to have to be thinking of if the building's going to fall out from under our feet. They are, let me think who Speedway has purchased this building, or at least has the note on this building in the atrium. They're doing a lot of renovation, and if you hear the drums of Jumanji in the background, that's somebody beating new pipe for downspouts inside the building to take care of a roof leak problem that we've had probably for the last 15 years at best. It's probably been more than that, and so we're going to be in that building that's going to be a lot more environmentally sensitive. It's going to be a lot better place for us to work and to make a great product for you. And we'll look forward to you all coming over and visiting with us. Our doors are always open. And with that, I'm done. I have some questions or answers or whatever. And let's see, I'll stop the share and see if we can. There we go. I see Jessica and I see myself as a little box now, so that's good.
All right, thanks, Jim. We do have a couple questions that did come in from the audience while you were presenting. The first one was regarding the new compliance process, with there just being one document. If there are mistakes found in the determination, can the agency rescind the letter of noncompliance or portions of the letter if they are found to be inaccurate.
So what happens now if we have a mistake in our current process, right? And don't get, again, don't get so wrapped up this just one letter thing. So if we have a mistake, we fix those mistakes, and we will work with the industry to make sure that both sides understand what compliance is and that we have a good path.
Thanks, Jim. Another question that came in was about the slide on the agency vision. And the question was, how do you ensure that the various programs are following the vision? And if it's found that a program isn't following the vision, what actions are taken?
They are excommunicated down to the garden level of the new office, where they will never be seen ever again. That's, we have a special room for those folks. No, we meet all the time. So what we're hoping is that, we're all going to be on one floor. It's spread out a little bit, but it's a heck of a lot better than 3 different offices. We've been sharing the same vision for the last 5 years. I don't know that we haven't been sharing that vision, and we have a great team presence among 3 buildings. We're going to have a better team presence among 1 building, and we're going to have a lot more in-presence meetings, whether we do that around a conference room and actually look at each other through a mask, or whether we do things on Zoom. So we've been currently, for the last, good Lord, it's been almost 4 months now, maybe close. It's been longer than 4 months. We've been doing well on keeping our vision and our teammates going in the same direction, because we communicate with these process improvement huddles very regularly. So that's how we keep our vision in check, and that we make sure that we're all going in the same direction.
Thanks. And we had one more question, unless there's more coming in. I saw your slide on the VW money and how it's being allocated. And if I remember correctly, you have not yet spent any money that's put towards electric vehicle chargers. Is that correct?
That actually is an inaccuracy of that slide. So we how do I say this? This is a rebate type of a program, right? So what happens is we have applications. We got, I forget how many applications in, but more applications for the EV charging stations than we had money to spend. We had a prioritization. So we'll be doing that, the blender pump stuff about the same way, right? And I forgot to mention my gratitude for the industry for stepping up and showing folks that there's other friends of the Nebraska Trust out there, besides the new friend group that just got established right after we had this application. Well, that's fine. We promote clean air in the agency. And my boss says that, you can't start talking about global warming and clean air stuff unless you start taking ethanol seriously and using it. And it's one of the easiest things that we can do to get clean air in Nebraska. We enjoy clean air in Nebraska. We're an attainment in all categorical areas with EPA in Nebraska. We're one of very few states that can say that. And it's because, we have good, healthy, clean living here. We work well with our industry partners on that. I see you as a partner, and I appreciate your partnership in helping us get money so that we can put more blender pumps out there so that you guys can make more ethanol and we can have a cleaner air. I mean, see how that circle kind of works, right?
Yeah, if I can interrupt just for a minute, where I was going with that question is there are now, at least in Europe, electric vehicle charging stations that are powered by biofuels, particularly 95% ethanol. And I was just wondering if that would be a potential option to possibly have in Nebraska?
Yeah, I don't know. Basically, we have allocated, so we have a placeholder for all 15% of that money now. Now the people that have that placeholder are going out and putting those pumps in, and then they'll send in their prescription card for the rebate out of their cafeteria plan, if you can think of it in terms of a cafeteria plan for your employees. So the money has been targeted. It's not necessarily all spent, but we just started, I think a week or two ago, the first round of rebates for that categorical area. So as soon as people start putting these things in, according to the planned application, then we'll do that. I don't, unless there's another nationwide settlement, I don't foresee that we'll be doing any more in this area with regard to like the VW thing of money. But you know, if we have different areas come open within EPA and can do different things on like a DERA type program, we'd be open to that.
Thanks. And there was just another question that came in, and it was listed for everyone. So Troy asked the question, so I'm not afraid to call Troy out because he didn't send it to me privately. But he asked, what's the plan to replace Todd Ellis and Gary Buttermore at the agency?
So there is not a plan to replace Gary. I stated earlier, but it probably wasn't very clear, that Sarah and Dave are assuming section positions. We eliminated that engineer permit position as a 4, recategorizing that to a lower grade engineer. And Sarah's going to be managing the engineers on the CP side, and Dave's managing the team on the OP side, which is a combined team. And then we're actively interviewing on Todd Ellis's old position, and when we have a candidate that we can name, we will do so. So we're seeing a little bit of efficiency with that, and if you saw really closely on that new organizational chart, we're going to be minus a division administrator in the future also. Dennis Burling, a 45-year plus division administrator, is going to be retiring sometime this spring. We've got plans to have an understudy for about 6 months that can help learn. He's a merit employee, a rules-based employee. That's a deputy department director. And then I have 2 political directors, Steve and Kara. And then I've got the rest of the components that are going to be in this other. Marty Link has announced her retirement coming up end of December. And there's another one that's out there that hadn't really told everybody yet what we know internally, but I'll let that person do that on their timeline. And so there's some division slots that are going to be open, and I got a little bit more opportunity to do things a little bit differently. And through a strategic planning process that we did about a year ago, and I've been thinking about a way to be more efficient and effective, decided that this is a good time to do this organizational change, and we're going to try this. So team's happy. They're talking about this in a very positive way. So I'm excited for that, and I'm looking forward to better serving you as a customer.
Well, thanks, Jim. Really appreciate you taking time and giving us a great update as always. And I'm going to turn it back to Roger to thank our sponsors and to thank, again, all the speakers who participated today. And of course, thanks to all of the ethanol plant employees and the ethanol advocates that could join us as well.
Well, Hunter, thank you very much for facilitating that portion of our summit today. I'm very much appreciated. Jim, thank you very, very much for the information which you gave to us today. You have, the information you have given has certainly helped a lot with the industry, I'm sure. And to all of our speakers, to Eric and to Sean and I've lost my names here all of a sudden. Doug, yes, Doug, how could I forget you? You know that, I wasn't doing that intentionally, but we just want to thank everybody that all of our speakers here today, and especially all of you who participated today. It's you who make up the ethanol industry here in the state of Nebraska. And we want to do everything we can here at the Nebraska Ethanol Board in order to keep this industry vibrant here in the state of Nebraska, not only vibrant, but moving forward and expanding. So that's our whole goal of what we do and why we do these types of programs. I am very hopeful that next year when we do this, we can all be meeting back in person. We don't know what the future holds on this. Hopefully by that time we have a vaccine for this thing called COVID-19, and we can all get back to a more normal type of life. I do want to put a plug in before we do leave here for our Emerging Issues Forum. We're moving ahead with plans for that. Hopefully we'll be able to meet in person, and that's going to be March 24th and 25th in La Vista. March 24th and 25th of 2021, of course, in La Vista at the La Vista Conference Center. So I just wanted to get that quick plug in. So with that, we are going to call the 2020 EHS Summit complete. And again, thank you everybody for attending. If you do come up with more questions, you can email either Jessica or myself, and we will get those questions to the person it needs to get to.